Good evening. Today is Tuesday, August 11th. This is the 5 p.m. meeting of the Whitman Select Board Budget Subcommittee meeting. Don Byers in attendance with Sean Kane. Also in attendance, Town Administrator Mary Beth Carter. Looking at the agenda, we'll start with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On the agenda is meeting minutes from July 14th. Motion to accept
meeting minutes.
Meeting minutes.
July 14th.
Sean Kane. Second, Don Byers. All in favor? Aye. Meeting minutes for July 28th have not been produced yet, so motion to table that to the next meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Next on the agenda is budget book. This was added at the request of Mr. Kane, so I'll open it to you to share what you want to.
Well, we've talked about it a little bit already, but I think just to keep the conversation going, definitely transparency is on the forefront of our priorities this year. We know that FY28 and beyond is going to be some difficult budget cycles, and we want to make sure that people are in the know about the budget process, things like financial policies and the current, how things came to be here. All things pertain to the budget. And we talked last week about how having a budget document, a comprehensive budget document, would be excellent. We know that some of the most effective budget documents are really comprehensive. It would take a long time to develop. So that might be out of our reach in the short term. But definitely getting something going so that people can, similar to, I think the schools put out a good budget document, similar to the schools, so that people can see not only Article 2, but also, like I said, there's a table of contents, and that you can look at revenues and expenditures and over time how things came to be this way, and a glossary of terms, financial policies. I think we could put together, even in a relatively short amount of time, a decent budget document and share. And I think connected to this, actually, we've been talking to Matt Dyer about trying to get a newsletter going. I think we could get I was hoping it was actually going to be on tonight's agenda, but it's not. Whether it's a monthly or bi-monthly newsletter, so that we can start to build up that, we don't have to depend on Facebook or those sorts of things. We can hopefully get a good email list going, start to send people an update regularly, monthly or bi-monthly, and then hopefully have a specific budget update in there, and then hopefully tie that to the budget document. I think the combination of those two things would really improve our transparency and really help with what we're trying to do with the financial policy.
As a town, I think we can certainly do better by getting more information out to the community, especially when it relates to where we've been, historical spending. So looking back, I think our annual budget should absolutely include at minimum 5-year look back of our expenses and the revenue that came in. And that shouldn't be hard to do at all, right? That's historical information we have at the fingers. So it would just involve data extraction and organized in a readable, easily digestible format for the citizens. And then the current year budget that we're in and what's proposed. And then also the projections, right?
Yeah.
3 to 5 years out. I think that's not asking too much in a budget book. And including our, what is the town's mission, vision, goals, strategic plan, where are we going, right? Why are we making these decisions? And the numbers to go with it. And the demographics, what kind of town are we? Tell our story. Yeah. So absolutely, I think we have areas of improvement that we can expand on just giving town meeting the Article 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I think to piggyback on some of the things that we've talked about before, like the financial management review and the financial trend monitoring system, those kind of things are clever, you know, and they could take a little bit more, maybe not in the short term, but over time. We've talked about how we want to make those things a priority, so we can take not only the priorities in the strategic plan, but also here are some of the major trends that we're looking at, because the things on the horizon are, you know, major concerns that we have and want you to be aware of. So not just this year, but as we look out 5 years, those trends and presented in an intelligent way could be really helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
I think those are all good ideas to begin the conversation about what type of budget book we're putting forward. Not necessarily what are the numbers right now for FY28 that we're, you know, in the baby steps of, but how are we going to present this information?
Yeah.
And so the community has a better idea where we're at. Yeah. Thank you.
That's great. So short-term, like action steps for that, I think Matt actually pretty quickly put together a simple like newsletter, just like a presentation of what it would look like, ran it through like an AI program, and I thought it looked incredible. You know, maybe having some of that prep so that when Sabrina comes on board, you know, we can have the conversation with them, and hopefully we can have some. I think for the newsletter, I think short term actually could be doable pretty quickly.
Yeah, if he's pulling something together already, I'd love to see it.
Yeah. Like I said, I was hoping to be on tonight's meeting, but maybe it's got to be on the next meeting and whatnot. But
if it's related to a budget book,
exactly, I think the
It's
two.
on.
I think they can be directly connected. You know, like the newsletter should be tied to the budget book, and as we're doing like budget updates in the newsletter.
Sure.
But then I think the format could be similar. You know.
But I think content of the budget book too, if you talk about using AI, which is a good tool to access data online, grabbing from the Department of Revenue, right? Our historical information's right there, you know, and putting it in a booklet form. Where the community may not be quickly accessing that themselves, but if we were sharing it via, you know, updates, I think that would be great.
Yeah. Probably my biggest concern is that we need to be careful about bogging down the administrative team. You know what I mean? Like, this is definitely a priority for us, and I think it's a priority for the board, so I feel confident that telling them that it's a priority will give them permission to work on it, but I think they're going to be spread thin with the amount of things that they have to work on, so somehow figuring out a balance between, listen, this is definitely a priority, transparency in the budget, the short-term action steps, and the long-term, and maybe where we can be by town meeting, and you know, that would be a cool discussion to have, or relevant discussion to have, you know.
Where do you see them being bogged down, if not working on the budget as a priority?
Yeah, for me, like I obviously, we know that the budget's going to be a big deal, so we need to make time. But I try to stay up to date on some of like the logistical stuff that you're doing, but I just know how busy the day can be and that kind of thing. But this in conjunction with some of the other things that we're talking about, I just want to be careful about bogging them down too much.
But I think we have to remember that it is the town administrator's job, with the town accountant, with the staff, and the assessor, to together pull that information together.
Yeah.
So I don't think the ask is going, I don't know, I mean, it sounds like you're saying by asking them to pull together a budget book, it's going to bog them down. I mean, just referring to your words. And
one thing I'm concerned about is, like, I have a hard time with timeline a little bit, like short-term goals versus long-term goals. I know by town meeting, it would be great to have a budget document. The type of budget, like how comprehensive the budget document can be, like Matt was able to, it's not here right now, but he was able to put together a newsletter, at least a template of a newsletter pretty quickly. You know, he wants to get some more communication from department heads to see how we can kind of feed that in to make the newsletter. But as far as like the template, he was like, oh, it's really not that bad. So that made me feel a lot better because I'm thinking if they had to like manually put together a newsletter or something, that's a whole lot more work. You know what I mean? So some of this might be like, oh yeah, it's a piece of cake, and we could just pull the information from the Department of Revenue or you know that kind of thing. But some of it might take longer than we anticipate. So I just want to make sure they're involved in the conversation. You can say, we can definitely do this in the short term, but this is going to take a bit longer.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to share something?
Yeah, just a
Could
question.
you share your name? And
My
address?
name is Rosemary Hanahill, and it was something you just said a little while ago. It was about the Department of Revenue dashboard information. That's kind of tricky to get to if you don't know where you're going, but once you get there, it really already has everything that we've reported that we've done in the last very, very in-depth, absolutely what we've done in the last period. I say, what is it? You can go up to 10 years, I think. But if we could find a way to link to that so it's easy for people to find it, I don't know if it's possible or not, but it's not. It shouldn't take any work because you've already done it and sent it in, and it's just what has been done in the past. But it does show you everything and how we spend our money and how we have in the past. And Finance Committee uses it all the time. So if there's
I think that's a great suggestion to add. If we're doing an email newsletter, then
not for the East. I was thinking from the website.
Oh,
or you could
that too. I think, providing summary data in a newsletter form and then a link for people who want to go further in depth and go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I think, Sean, you brought up the budget book, and it's important to start talking about it. And I think we need to have this conversation with our town administrator and town accountant and the staff to see what they're able to pull together. And if Matt's pulling together a newsletter already, then certainly I'd like to see what can be produced on a sample budget book, given the data that's out there right now.
Yeah.
So, that being said, we do have our town accountant here, Jen Argenti, with us. As we move on to the next items, Jen, I'd like to invite you, if you don't mind, to sit up here just to engage in the conversation, because some of these policies that we're going to be talking about will include you. So feel free to grab a middle chair or wherever. Thank you. Thank you. So next on the agenda, financial.
Myers,
Yes.
Now that WHDA is here, do you want to try and see if they can hook up the projector for you now that the WHDA staff is here?
Okay, great.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
So we had this at 6:30 exactly, and we just told that we just need to get set up so she can show her presentation on the screen.
Can I use that with my laptop? The HDMI?
Yeah.
Over here.
Over there. And let's get around this side.
get out of the way.
Too many people tripping over it.
It'll just be for this meeting, just for the next half hour.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You're gonna have to turn that down.
Oh,
At some point, anyway.
the AC?
No, the AC, the speaker. Let's go along.
Oh, good. Good.
Thank you. All right, so at the last meeting, we reviewed capital planning and debt management. I left it on the agenda in case there was any follow-up you had, Sean, or Mary Beth, or Jen.
No, I thought it was a great discussion, and I'm
Okay.
curious to see what the board thinks tonight.
Right, we've referred it to the full select board tonight. It's on the agenda. For
Just to
discussion.
clarify, though, for my own sake, and I think for the sake of tonight's meeting, we're presenting this as draft policy that we support, knowing that the logistics of the policy, some of like the ratios and that kind of stuff, will have to be worked out. We'll have to go to like the professional team, give us some feedback, and ultimately the select board would then, have those ratios and those percents in front of them for like the final kind of support. Is that what I'm thinking?
I'm nodding in agreement, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
for the audio recording.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Right, we're going to have a
'Cause
discussion.
some people will read them and like, well, is it exactly those ratios or whatnot? Is that what we're voting tonight? And no, tonight we're voting on conceptually those policies because I think they're really sound. But
At the subcommittee, you mean? What we're voting?
at the subcommittee, we're voting just because they're conceptually sound, but they're not. They're kind of geared towards Rockland, which is slightly different than Whitman, and obviously our financial situation is different than theirs. So having the professional staff review those ratios and then
Right.
give us some feedback will definitely be helpful.
Right. We're really reviewing it and then sending it to the full board for a full discussion. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even tonight at the full discussion, I'm saying we don't have the backup or whatever for like we're not proposing a ratio or anything.
No.
Like, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No. All right. So tonight we have financial reserves. So I will share that on the screen. Let's see. Debt management. So for the benefit of the folks in the room, it is shared on the screen. Again, we're referring to the town of Rockland's financial policy as a reference because it was approved by their board in conjunction with the Division of Local Services and Department of Revenue. I'll just read the purpose that they have. I won't read the full policy in the interest of time, but the purpose says financial reserves to help the town stabilize finances and maintain operations during difficult economic periods. This policy establishes prudent practices for appropriating to and expending reserve funds. With well-planned sustainability, the town can use its reserves to finance emergencies and other unforeseen needs, to hold money for specific future purposes, or in limited instances to serve as revenue sources for the annual budget. Reserve balances and policies can also positively impact the town's credit rating and consequently its long-term borrowing costs. So the policy goes on to state who this policy applies to, which would be the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, Town Administrator, and Capital Planning Committee in their budget decision-making roles, the Town Accountant and Board of Assessors' job duties. The scope is goals for an appropriate use of general reserves, including free cash, stabilization funds, and overlay surplus. The policy then has sections labeled free cash. For myself, I highlighted in the second paragraph of free cash. Let me expand that a little bit more. So it says, again, referencing Town of Rockland, will strive to realize year-to-year free cash certifications equal to 2 to 4% of the annual general fund budget. So again, this is a percentage point that my question would be, in our instance, what would that number be?
Yeah.
And that's what we can further ask for the data on that. 2 to 4% of the annual general fund budget.
But we were connecting that with their prior in the policy, the revenue projections as well. So revenue projections and free cash, those policy seems to be connected, obviously. So the discussion on revenue projection will definitely impact that. I don't want to interrupt, Commissioner.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think that this is an interesting policy for our current situation. We know that the next couple of years, 5 years, are going to be tight for obvious reasons. So the way that we use our stabilization is interesting. Like how much money, how you interpret this policy when you're in good financial times is slightly different than how this policy is implemented when you're in really difficult financial times. And the nuances of that, I think, do I think it would be nice to adopt this policy as it's written, but then over the next 5 months, really do some research with the leadership team to figure out the nuances of how we need to implement it in a way that will allow us to make it through the next 5 years without decimating our, like a personnel, but also not eat up our reserves and ruin our, like a bond rating and that kind of stuff. And that's the tricky balance that we're gonna have to find.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
I think,
Like if, for instance, it says, the town can use its reserves to finance emergencies or other unforeseen needs, to hold money for specific future purposes, or in limited instances to serve as a revenue source for the annual budget. So it does make reference to that purpose in the policy. It's just how do you do that in a really intelligent way that isn't going to undermine your ability to, like your bond rating and that kind of stuff.
right. And I think in looking at the free cash section, also at the end of the paragraph, it says the town will strive to keep its year-end free cash balance at a minimum of 30% of the annual certification. So just for an example, if the town and the Department of Revenue certified us with $1 million of free cash, that policy, if we were to adhere to it, would say we would want to leave $300,000 in free cash, only spending or appropriating $700,000.
Right.
And we know this past year, I don't recall what our free cash total was, but that takes discipline, and perhaps that's one piece of the financial reserves that we would adhere to, while maybe in difficult times, right? We might be accessing the next section, which is stabilization funds. So again, this is a conversation, how do we balance all of these given the strains we have? So stabilization, my notes, let's see. It talks about general stabilization and then special purpose stabilization funds, which I believe Whitman also has a capital stabilization now and a general. So we would want to be mindful when we talk about stabilization to identify each one. General stabilization, this policy says the town will endeavor to achieve and maintain a minimum balance of 3 to 5% of the current operating budget. Again, numbers we'd want to have if we were to adopt this. When possible, withdrawals of funds should be limited to the amount available above the 3% minimum target, right? So if we're there, then we could access that. And most importantly, I think, is the last section where it says if you do have a withdrawal, it should be limited to 1/3 of the fund's balance, and the town administrator will develop a detailed plan to replenish the fund to the minimum level within the next 2 fiscal years. So I think these are important pieces that aren't necessarily in the framework of what Whitman has right now for a financial policy.
Yeah.
It doesn't talk about who's responsible or who that replenishment piece.
Yeah. Can I add a piece to the free cash as well?
Yeah.
Hanover's free cash policy and Southwick. Both of them, I think, as we move this conversation forward, I think we should reference, because Hanover's is nuanced in, it speaks to their specific situation. Remember that they passed an override, and I think their intention is to make the override last so that they don't have to potentially ask for another override during these 5 years. Mm-hmm. And the pension liability is very much on their mind. So referencing that that policy, I think, would be helpful, because it isn't just a straight, you will not use free cash as in the operating budget. They talk about how you can kind of do that in an intelligent way. And Southwick also, they were going from a situation where they were using a lot of free cash each year in their operating budget, and they wanted to get away from that practice. So they kind of talked about just slowly moving away from it, like stepping down, not doing it in like a black and white kind of way. So I don't think either one is exactly fit for our situation, but I think both are worthy of just reviewing, so that we can see there can be policies that are slightly more tailored
Yeah.
to your, our specific financial needs and what would it look like? Or,
Right. And I think Hanover's plan sounds similar to what the Whitman Finance Committee was somewhat advocating for, as well as the select board during the times when there was talk about a 1-year override, a 3-year override, and I think the communication could have been a little bit better, and people were trying to explain along that concept, right? It's not a 3-year override, but it's an override amount that the intent is to, sustain us for 3 years, right?
Yeah.
To hold the budget for 3 years. And I think that's what Hanover's intent is also, to reduce their reliance on free cash and slowly increase that levy to use that override capacity. Jen, do you have any feedback?
I do like what Sean is saying about putting in place policies of what's going on now, and then moving away from that when, these liabilities are starting to be paid off and the town is feeling a little bit of relief. Just so what we're setting now makes sense, and we're not, setting something that we want to be attainable but is not.
Right. Is that something you and Mary Beth could possibly work together before the last day, or in conjunction with Sabrina coming on?
Yeah, we
Because
can definitely
you've got a pulse on where we're at now.
look into that.
Great.
Yeah.
I think getting some feedback would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Make a note.
Do you want me to make a motion about this, or?
I'd still like to continue on. Just there's mention of capital stabilization, also with target levels of a 2 to 3% of the general fund budget. I'm just looking at that.
I think that, again, that's connected to the debt management policy. Is our strategy to move in the direction of we're going to look for these shorter debt exclusions that are going to help us pay for our capital needs, or are we going to use more free cash to pay for more of our capital needs? If we can
Well, the
get
funding source for
funding
capital
for funding source for
can be a
capital.
variety of things, right?
Yeah. Whatever we do, I think the two should be connected, and also take into consideration our financial situation over the next 5 years, which would be the most advantageous for us to do. It's a really complex question, but we want to be very strategic about it. So I think we need a financial policy that speaks to the way that we stabilize capital and the way that we fund capital. I'm not confident myself personally to say this is exactly how we should do it. I just think there needs to be a debt management policy. There needs to be a policy that says how we're going to either feed into capital stabilization or use capital stabilization, so that we can set that financial plan and feel confident that we're moving forward together,
Right. And part of that is identifying the capital plan also. Capital planning,
Yes.
capital planning committee.
It's cool how we're all intertwined.
Right. And so, there are several steps when we talk about capital, right? What the needs are, how the projects are rated, what the priorities are, and then what the funding sources are. I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
Some from free cash, some maybe from borrowing, which is paid through the levy, or some from a debt exclusion, some from capital stabilization.
Yeah.
So being mindful of what all those balances are is important. Sharing, I don't know if that's legible enough, I can enlarge it, but on the screen, the current Whitman financial policy does talk about stabilization funds, also free cash. So, there is a policy in place. So absent of doing something different right now, we do have a framework here to go by, as well as, the current free cash reserves policy does say that the town will strive to fund capital improvements of between 40 to 60% of free cash, right? So it's interesting to read that and think of how historically we've talked about capital planning and so forth. So I don't know that we've actually, or if Finance Committee or the Capital Committee has referenced this financial policy that's in place right now.
I think that's speaks to one of the needs for what we're doing is we need instead of people working in silos, we don't want to connect everybody, get their feedback to see what they say, because we don't want to override the Capital Committee, obviously, or the Finance Committee. So inviting them to the table, and hopefully, I think through not just the financial policy, but hopefully kind of like a financial plan over the next couple of years. So how this all comes together and we work together to do this.
I guess what I'm saying is we do have a plan in place, right? We do have policies. So
Yes.
it's felt like there was nothing, but in fact we had something.
No, yeah.
So-
I mean, we reference policy often and we even voted on it a number of times at the select board for sure. I think one of the reasons why I like Rockland's is because it's a more comprehensive policy that speaks to all the if our policy is 5 pages or 6 pages, theirs is 25 or 28 pages for just the financial planning, and then another whatever it is 50 for the operations. It's much more comprehensive, and I think that's just a step in that direction.
Yeah. Yes?
Yes, Mary Beth. This was done and prepared based on Rockland's, tailored for Rockland. Rather than just taking what's here, would it be worth having DLS do it tailored for Whitman based on our numbers? So there's our policy says stabilization 5 to 10%, Rockland says 3. There's a big difference there. And even if our policy is 3, you withdraw money from stabilization, that's not viewed very well by our rating agency. So you can change the policy and say, well, we have more than 3, let's just take it out and use it. But you're still withdrawing from your stabilization, which has another trigger. So I'd want that taken into consideration, our financial advisor or Moody's rating, just to see if it ever went that way, what the effect would be then on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think is Donnie okay?
Yeah.
If you look at Rockland's, but then there was another one that was done 5 years ago. You can see they're both done by DLS, and they look the same. Much of the language is exactly the same. I think it is some of those ratios and the specific numbers that need to be tailored for our specific financial situation.
Because Rockland may not have even had 3%, so they were striving to get there.
Sure.
We don't know that because it was tailored for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, a lot of great information. I think that I see some of the, even with the capital, it said 5 years and 50,000. Well, we're 10,000 for a capital item. So there's some. We don't, I think, want to just adopt something like you had said at the beginning. We want to make sure that the capital committee, is involved, treasurer, the accountant, and so forth, to make the ratios relatable to the town.
Yep.
I think that's what we've been saying all along, that we weren't putting forward these percentages.
Not taking a vote or
As is.
anything at the select board tonight. Yep.
Okay. Then, just to finish up on this section of stabilization, Rockland also mentions a stabilization fund for their opioid settlement funds that come in. I know Whitman also receives those funds, so having some insight into those balances. Marijuana host community agreement stabilization fund, same, we have revenue for that, but I don't know that
I don't believe we have a fund set up. We do have an opioid settlement fund. I don't believe it's a stabilization
I believe
fund.
it's under special revenue.
Special revenue
Yeah.
fund,
Okay.
right. And we don't have one, as far as I know, for the marijuana host community agreement stabilization fund. No.
Right, not a formal stabilization, okay.
No.
Next references retained earnings, so this would be related to water sewer. We have retained earnings with an enterprise account. Again, most of this is maintained and reviewed by water and sewer commissioners. And it talks about maintaining a reserve amount. Again, looking for details on where that stands.
Yep.
For Whitman's water sewer enterprise.
Right now, we have a very healthy retained earnings for the enterprise fund. I
How
want
would
to
you
say
define very healthy?
I want to say it was 5.6 million. It was 5 point something million for FY26 that got certified.
It's one of the things that it's kind of like another silo. We'd like to work with those guys. We don't want to write policy telling them what to do, obviously, but it'd be nice to invite them into this process and say, hey, we're looking to develop some policy to help us get some good financial ground and whatnot. They obviously have a big stake in capital, and they obviously have the indirect cost and then the retained earnings. Somehow find a way to collaborate with them to hopefully get them to buy in and play a role in this.
Right, I guess a governance question would be if the select board adopts a policy such as this to maintain a minimum reserve amount of 10 to 15%. It says of the operations total budget. Does that mean just the water sewer department's budget?
I would say yes.
The enterprise fund, yes.
Okay, so governance-wise, if we were to adopt a policy, do they need to follow that? I know they are their own commission, but
Right.
it's a town policy.
This kind of speaks to, it's funny, the discussion we were having the other night with the difference between like a town administrator and a town manager. We do have different groups that have elected officials and the commissions. Like, it'd be nice to involve them in this process and get them to willingly participate. I mean, they've done a good job, so I'm not trying to take away any autonomy, just we want to create a plan.
Yeah, and
for
I'm
the
not
whole
questioning
town.
the job they're doing.
No.
As I said, it's a governance question, right?
Yeah.
Does the select board have the authority to set a policy that would, strive to maintain a balance in their account? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we go to the MMA, Mass Municipal Association, and ask that governance question. It does also mention to maintain the target reserve, the water and sewer commissioners must periodically review and when necessary adjust the user rates. Right? So if we find that their retained earnings exceeds
Right.
even if it's at 20%, right, and we're asked 10 to 15, then I'd be interested to know what's contributing to that high balance. And is it the rates? Does it matter? Or are there expenses that are indirect that we're not pulling from there and that is being funded in the levy, right? That be.
Well, for the water sewer, you do have a
Yeah, I
clear formula for the indirect costs that we have used every year. So I don't think that would really be
Yeah.
the part of it. But
Yeah.
Although there's one part that I would like to discuss about
Please.
that. One of the indirect cost piece.
on the trash,
We'll get, that would be next
Yes.
meeting. We'll table that, but indirect cost allocations.
But it is funny how they are interconnected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Again, we're still on financial reserves. Moving on, there's overlay surplus. So this is where the Board of Assessors votes to raise an overlay amount. And the purpose of the overlay reserve is to offset unrealized revenue resulting from uncollected property taxes, abatements, and exemptions. One bullet point here, the fourth one down mentioned, let me share on the screen a little more. Timing of the next DLS certification review scheduled every 5 years. So my question would be, when was our last review? When is the next review, timing-wise? Getting an idea for this data.
It's a good thing about policy, I think, is it helps for people in the know, they deal with this all the time, but for me, certainly, who isn't, seeing like, oh, there is a review every 5 years and I should look into that.
Right.
Like, it just helps me understand the process better. you know?
Right. And where you were speaking about the difference between town manager and town administrator, we have a town administrator here who makes recommendations to the board, right? And it's the board who's ultimately voting. And to vote and make a decision, I want to be informed with the data and with the numbers, right? So that's why this is most important. In the last section, it says at the conclusion of each fiscal year, the Board of Assessors will submit to the town administrator and town accountant an update of the overlay reserve with data that includes, but not limited to, the gross balance, potential abatement liabilities, and any transfers to surplus.
Which I think is important because, especially if taxes have been going up a little bit and we know that we're going to have some difficult budgets. And I think it's a reevaluation year, right? And, so being in tune with that stuff is really important for us, I think. How much should we be setting aside for the overlay?
But then at the end of the year, if there is a balance, this mentions, the Board of Selectmen may request that the Board of Assessors vote to declare those balance surplus available for use in the capital improvement plan.
Yeah.
So it could be potential money, only if it's unused.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of the proposed financial reserves as written and approved by the town of Rockland. Any other comments here by our guests? No?
Would you like a motion?
Sure.
I'll make a motion to propose the financial reserve section of the financial policy, Rockland's financial policy, with the understanding that the specifics will be reviewed by our financial team and kind of customized for Whitman's financial situation.
I will second that. All in favor? Aye. All right, next on the agenda is to review forecasting. So this policy purpose written says to assess the range of choices available to budget decision makers when determining how to allocate resources. This policy establishes guidelines for creating projections of revenue and expenditures as part of the annual budget process and multi-year fiscal planning. By presenting the future implications of current budget scenarios, forecasting helps local officials to make strategic plans for lasting fiscal sustainability and future investment. This policy and scope applies to town administrator, town accountant, and appraiser job duties, Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and Capital Planning Committee in their budget analysis and decision-making responsibilities. The scope is creation, revision, and year-to-year conversion of a multi-year forecast of revenues and expenditures as part of the annual budget process, guidelines for formulating the assumptions that form the basis for forecast projections. All right. Couple areas that I highlighted. Right off the top, it says to determine the town's operating capacity for future fiscal years, the town accountant, under the town administrator's direction, will annually create a detailed forecast with 5-year projections of revenue and expenditures. So I'll turn it over to you, Jen. I'm just kidding, but
No, I do know.
respect to you and
I do know
the
on
job.
the DOR they have
Yeah.
right now a template. I believe it goes back 5 years. That's pre-made. I know it's a lot of different tabs, but obviously things flow into one another. But
Yeah.
that could
So you
always
have
be
a
an
tool,
option that
is what
could be
you're
looked
saying,
at.
right?
Yeah.
You have resources and tools,
Yeah.
certainly, to help you. And then, to your credit, it does say here, town accountant will create conservative forecasts. And I think that ties into some of the free cash budgeting, right? Not to come up short at the end of the year.
I like how the assumptions for revenue projection are made explicit. so that everybody can see them. You know, we could show this to the select board, and I'm sure it will be shown to the select board, and everybody can look right down and see, like, these are the assumptions that we're using for our revenue projections. So there's no, we're just kind of doing the math and presenting so everybody's on the same page about what we're projecting. I think some of them obviously will be, it's not going to be so easy. One-time revenues will not be used in the projection of fund ongoing recurring operating expenditures. That's one of the things, you know, that's one of the assumptions. Do we, given our current financial situation, do we modify that in a way that allows us to use some one-time revenue to, you know, to help over the next 5 years, and how much is that going to be? Whatever we decide on it prior to doing the revenue projection, and we put it in there so everybody sees. We're going to use $250,000 of one-time, you know, whatever it is, but it's going to be right there so everybody can see it. You know?
And my note to myself as I was doing my homework on this, I wrote how much one-time revenue did we use for FY26, right?
Yeah.
Even 25, 27. So where are we at, right? To simply say it will not be used in the future, we have to consider what's the hole that we have, because we did do that, right? And I don't have that number. I don't remember.
And then to take it just a step more, a step deeper, the pension liability, I know it is in the operating budget, yes, but it does have a big section of it has an end life, you know, in 5 years. So to me, that does change things a little bit. You know, if it didn't have an end life and it just kept going on, then obviously using one-time funds for that would be foolish, because you're just setting yourself up to fail. But there is an end life to it.
Right.
You know, so it does change.
A portion of it will always be there, but what is the piece that is the additional assessment, right, on top
Roughly
of that?
10%
Yeah.
is your normal costs on an ongoing basis that
Yeah.
we'll always have beyond that. Just remember, too, that the towns have asked for Plymouth County to extend that out. They can go out to 2040. Hopefully, well, I would rather see it just finished so that we free up that money and can steer a good chunk of that to our
We disagree about this.
We do,
But Tom O'Brien was here last fall also.
right.
And he was fairly firm in saying, towns have been asking, and right now,
But that doesn't mean
That's
that,
FY32.
that next year, that board, a different board, they might say, push it out a year or two.
Or the
Because
pension
towns
bond.
are hurting.
Or the pension obligation bond discussion.
Right.
That is a relevant discussion. You know, I think if that were on the table, that could be a viable option for us. You know, and that's like kind of a state level discussion.
right.
But,
Just looking at some of these bullet points, just backing up a little bit, it stood out to me, you know, the town's level of excess levy capacity, right? I like that it touches on that, because we know in the past that's went unnoticed, untalked about, and money was left on the table when we could have had revenue. So I know it feels like we're in a pattern of capturing all the revenue we can, up to the 2.5 that we legally can. There's another mention of, you know, the town administrator will annually review the levy limits relation to the levy ceiling and talk about potential override capacity and to guard against the levy limit approaching or hitting the ceiling, right? These are things I haven't really heard the board talk about in the past, but I think it's important to know what those numbers are and to understand them and where we're at. Capacity, it's out there. The Department of Revenue and DLS have that information. Local receipts estimates will not exceed 90% of the prior year's actual collections. I think the town administrator has probably followed closely to that in budgeting, would you say?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I missed one. I think the most important, going back, local aid projections. When I hear local aid, I think of AGA, right, and the unrestricted general government aid. And that formula is far from perfect. and we know it's sort of rolled forward year after year. And I'd really be looking towards our legislators, state reps, so forth, to looking what can be improved upon, right? How can we increase that from the state, right? Maximize our state tax dollars. This also mentions Chapter 70 aid. We know with the regional school district, South Shore Tech, they get their Chapter 70 aid directly. The town gets a small piece of that. That portion is the piece of Chapter 70 that the town gets, what is that related to? Mary Beth?
I never
I would
understood
have
that
to,
either.
yeah, no, I'd have to, do you know
Yeah,
that
we'd
one
have to
either?
look into
And you were in the
it.
schools, right?
Busing?
I think it has to do with the busing for
Agricultural.
agriculture.
That's right. Yes.
Anytime you want a Chapter 70 or 90,
Because
I'm here for you.
I was, see, I've put that part way in the back of my brain. Yes, so the students who are,
Personal
or,
ag.
yeah, we're not a member of those agricultural schools, so that transportation piece and that,
And
This-
Norfolk Ag.
that assessment piece.
I think this is also interesting because Rockland is not a regional school and we are. So given that we are a regional school district, is there anything that we could add or, things that we should be keeping up with? Because it feels like it's relevant,
Yeah. Are you relating to this where the town of Rockland has a 70%, 30% revenue sharing process with the school department?
Like that, like would be, given that it's a regional district, not otherwise, how would that change? We don't have direct insight into like some of the Chapter 70 or the school enrollment projections, that kind of stuff.
But we can, right? I
Oh,
think
yeah,
the
yeah.
district
Oh, no,
would be
yeah,
happy to
certainly.
share that. It's not that it's a mystery.
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Would it be good just to tie them into the process so that we're integrating the regional information into what we're using for projections?
Yeah, when I read this and understand that Rockland calculates their annual increase in their tax levy, so the Prop 2.5 increase, they take that amount, they take their new growth, I'm just trying to highlight here, right? Increases in excise tax, payments in lieu of taxes, and changes in state aid. And that's where they split it. So that total, really new revenue annually, they allocate 70% as the school district's increase. What that number is and what it would equal for Whitman-Hanson, I don't know. Is it lower? Is it higher than what the assessment is now? Just, again, looking to gather information.
Yeah, whatever it
Fact.
is, we do need something like that written down in policies so that people can see what it is and then know what to expect. Because right now, we're trying to do the revenue-based formula this past year, and I think that has some merit. So whatever it is, we just need a policy about it so that everybody can be on the same page, And I do think it needs to be an intelligent policy.
That being said, a policy, I think any policy we set that relates to language about a school department is not going to govern, South Shore Tech, Whitman-Hanson, Norfolk Aggie, Bristol, Plymouth, so those schools will set their assessments.
Yeah.
But they could be used as a guide, right? The beginning of a conversation about how, the revenue each year.
Yeah.
Mr. Trestle, you have any feedback?
I mean, I guess, yeah. I know that I feel like I'm in this room a lot saying this, but you guys have just said it, which is that as a regional school district, we are responsible for setting the assessment. I think language in terms of what you got, so Genti has a very difficult job because of being a town in a regional school district for forecasting purposes, but I think language around forecasting, I think, is obviously the purview of the select board and your financial team. But I think language about things like revenue sharing with the school department would not necessarily be appropriate for a regional school district, because that's you setting what you would give us from your revenue, which is not the way that the relationship works in terms of a regional school district, where we have, obviously, and I've also said this many times in this room, obviously it makes sense for the school department to work very closely with the select boards of the two towns to make sure that we're not asking for outlandish things, and making sure that we're all kind of on the same page of things, but just making sure that your financial policy doesn't assume things about what percentage of your revenue you'll be giving to the schools, because that's not actually how it works. And I think that it's, like I said, it's a conversation, and I think it's a working relationship between those three bodies. And but I think just to the point of, I think Ms. Dyer was saying this earlier, a governance standpoint, by putting it in a financial document that you're going to be setting aside this amount of revenue for the schools, is interfering with our governance as the body that's elected to produce the school budget and the school assessments.
Yeah, I don't think we've gone back and forth on this, and I hate that it comes out that way, because it's the last thing I want to do is to say we're going to set what the school's going to get. That's not what I want the message to be at all. I think for me, the reason why it makes sense is because we have to have a starting place, and we have to know, I mean, in some ways, like maybe the language could be something like a certain amount of the revenue share, and then over and above, we would potentially have to look for an override or something like that, or some language in there, because if we don't have an intelligent way to clearly define explicitly how we're gonna, at least the first step in the process, then you guys don't know where to begin, or we don't know where to begin, and we get down to the end like we always have. I just think having some intelligent process laid out, at least, is like proactively over the next couple months. We could have discussions back and forth. Be like, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, and we go back and forth until we finally find like a little bit of middle ground. So then when we do start the budget process, at least we're at a place that's relatively intelligent, or not binding, but it's like a suggested starting spot that is at least, had been negotiated.
Right, and I understand that, and I understand, like I said, I understand the difficulty too of how all this works, because you're trying to build projections of, so you can build your budget for the entire town, including the cost of the regional school district. I would say, and this is just, and this might sound like haughtier than I mean it to be, but our starting point is the needs of the students. Like, that's our first starting point when we're looking at a budget. It's not, so when we talk about what's the first step for us is, what do we need to provide an education to our students? So I think that's, like, I understand exactly what you're saying, but I think that having some kind of, I just want to be mindful of the fact that, Whitman putting something in their financial policy about where they're going to start in this process, I think, especially if it includes a specific figure or some kind of formula, makes it difficult for us to do our jobs correctly, because we're not going to be looking at, or we shouldn't be looking at our job to be like, well, what do the towns want to give us, and how can we work with that amount? Like I said, we're going to be, obviously we have lots of needs that are not going to get met, because obviously the realities of what the revenue situation is from both the state and from our two member towns. But I think that so that's where I think the negotiation would come in, being like, this is what we need, and this is what we have determined, the educational leadership that we have at our district has determined we need to properly educate the students of Whitman and Hanson, and we're not going to get everything that we ask for. We understand that, right? That's I think where our negotiating starting point would be, as opposed to a predetermined figure in a financial policy from the two towns. And I think that's just where I would, like, I understand exactly what you're saying. Like, you guys need to know how to build your budget and start doing that and all that. And I know the idea that we're going to be coming, the worry that, the school district's going to come in with these outlandish requests and what have you. But my charge and the other members of my committee's charge is to identify what students need and build a budget that does it as best we can. And then we understanding that that's our first step in the process that will be negotiated with the two towns. In terms of those assessments, so that's kind of where I think I disagree a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Trussell. One moment. I want to take a time check because there's a meeting coming in the room and I want to be able to wrap this up in 5 minutes. So I would just add that my opinion is that as a member of the select board, a starting process for our budget would be to make a projection, right, of what an assessment would be, and I would be inclined to follow something along the lines of that number as a projection, knowing full well that the school district and the South Shore VOTEC are going to send the assessments just like Plymouth County Retirement sends assessments, and we get a lot of them. So that's where I would add. Ms. Hannah Hill, I
Thank you
recognize
so
you.
much. So I think it's really important to realize that this, and I think you probably mentioned this is not a regional school. So when we're looking at their budget, this is actually part of their budget. And it's a little different because they're having those conversations about how much aid is coming in and how much it isn't. So, and even that, when I talk to people in Rockland, they're saying that 70% is not working for them. Like that portion is not working for them, and from each side. So let's assume it is 70% of this, and the aid from the state doesn't come in, or it comes in more. Those numbers, the numbers that influence these are so flexible. There's so much that goes on with them that sometimes you can grow a department larger than, which is not what we have here, but grow a department larger and then you have something you have to maintain, right? Or you could presume much less than what you need to do. So I would set an amount that isn't guaranteed, because that's kind of what went on over in Rockland, that the school just looks at the 70 and they say this is what we're going to get. That isn't guaranteed either way, that gives you a portion of your budget, but ultimately recognizing, and something that I don't feel it really has happened, is that you are constitutionally obligated to educate your students. So they can't be aside. I would start with this budget, and then I would almost do a percentage of other budgets to grow before I would do this, in a sense, and work it backwards and do the things that you legally have to do and uphold first, because we've sort of been working this 5% for some time, and it really has hurt us. And I think people have come in and asked for us to keep a number, and we for many years have watched the stability of the schools sort of pay into what the towns probably should have been paying. And we watched the disaster unfold on television when we lost so many staff. So I would think in a very large amount, and then if you have extra, put that into stabilization or something.
Thank you. Yes, Sean.
Just slightly different perspective to what you're saying at the beginning of the budget process. My understanding is you start with your revenue projection, after you do your revenues and then your expenditures, but then you would put together a budget message. So the town administrator, the financial team would send out a budget message like Mary Beth typically does at the start of I'm not talking about the region, but for other departments at the start of our budget process, so that as the budget message goes out, hey, this is what we're expecting in revenues. Therefore, put together a budget in each of your departments that is, pretty tight on expenses, and so again 2% or 2.5%, and then you get back that information. You're kind of removing that part of the process from what you're saying. You're just starting directly with, I know you're just talking off the top of your head, but you just start with what your needs are without the limitations of what your revenue projections grant you. Then there's obviously going to be a gap between what the needs of any department are without limitation versus what the needs are with a limitation. So somehow connecting that dot. I mean, it should not be binding. Whatever number we put in there should not be binding at all. Ultimately, the authority lies with you. But understanding that there is a strategic way that we're coming up with revenue projections so that you can see they're not putting in 5% into stabilization just so they can pad their funds. They're not going to put money into stabilization. They're going to use a little bit of one-time money. They're going to really try and, you can see hopefully the things that we're going to try and do to make it the most doable, financially responsible budget possible with these projections, so that when the rough estimate is given, at least it'll be like better understood.
Right. Well, I think I might not have been clear about this. I understand the need to come up with some kind of, for your benefit, for the forecasting part that you guys are, revenue forecasting part. I'm objecting specifically to the language of the Rockland, which is again obviously different because it's not a regional district, of having a revenue sharing process where it's broken down, being like that the schools are going to get 30% and the town's going to get 70%. In that revenue sharing process, and because that's not, because they can perhaps do that because the school department is part of their overall budget.
I would interject though, I've spoken with members from single municipal towns, and they on select boards, and they will always mention that the school committee still has autonomy within that town as well.
Yeah.
So their select board is not even governing in Stoughton or Hull or Marshfield or Hanover, right? They are, at the mercy, if you will, of the school committee setting a budget.
Well,
still.
I think it speaks to obviously the importance of education. That it's not even just Massachusetts, but like it's one of the few parts of a town budget where they have their own elected body that represents them, because that's how important it is. I think I was just meaning in the sense that I'm looking at Rockland's budget. The school department budget is part of the overall budget. It's not an assessment that is sent to so there is more. There's still autonomy in the school, but there's more interplay, I think, between the select board and the school committee in a single town school system as opposed to a regional.
Do you want me to make the recommendation without that included? You would prefer that?
We actually haven't gotten through this whole one. We still have
yes,
expenditure.
I'm not saying we're done. I'm just saying, is that your preference?
Well, I think I would just. I guess so. I think, or at least have that be part of the discussion, because I just think that having language in a financial thing saying that the town has a revenue sharing process with the school department does not. I don't think that's germane to a regional school district in the same way it would be to a single school. And I said again, for forecasting, you can if you want to use some kind of formula that you say, well, this is what we're going to use for when we're forecasting our revenue for the coming year, and then it goes out to the fire department and the police department to say, hey, this is what we're dealing with. But I think just literally saying that we're going to be sharing this revenue percentage with the school department does, I think, impact, I think, our autonomy as a duly elected committee whose charge is to set the assessments to the two towns. And so I think that some other language maybe that makes it clear that this is not a non-binding because it's not. And I think that because I think what I worry about is having language in here that makes it seem like it's binding, so that if we do have to come to the towns with an assessment that is larger than that, whatever that percentage you said is, that people say like they're only supposed to do 30% of the budget. Now they're, I looked at actually.
I think that's actually backwards, right? It's 70% to the school.
I don't know.
No, it's not.
No, it isn't.
It's not, because it's. I actually looked at the Rockland's.
It's like 4%. Right?
It ended up being. It was actually almost similar to Whitman's. It was 37%.
Was it 37?
It was 37% of the overall budget was
I'm
for
gonna-
the schools.
Each year.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask that we continue the discussion on forecasting for the next meeting. And just to wrap up the meeting, because there's another meeting coming in this room for the people who are listening to a recording, or the one person. So setting the next meeting date, Sean?
Sure.
What would you like to have in mind? I'm trying to remember if we set our next select board for the 25th.
We did, yes.
Okay. So
We'll go to the 25th.
we will say August 25th at 5 p.m.
Sure.
And we will continue on with forecasting and possibly indirect cost allocation investments, one-time revenues, OPEB, as far as we go. Next meeting.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
that was great. Good discussion.
All set.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved? Or
Second?
second? All in favor? Aye.